Welcome to Do Good, Do Business, a podcast dedicated to uncovering practical tips for SMEs on how to make a difference in the world while doing business. Today's guest, Urs Riggenbach, is the co-founder of Lytefire, a Finnish social impact company specializing in thermal technologies that translate into solar-powered ovens, cookers, and roasters. Through these, Urs and his team have brought sustainable economic empowerment to the world, often by collaborating with local NGOs and major INGOs like World Vision and Plan International. From their story, we will find out how they got started, where this path led them, and pencil down some of the lessons learned that can help you follow in their footsteps. This podcast is brought to you by Business Turku, the local development company for the Turku region in Finland, and it is part of the INGO project funded by EU's Central Baltic Program. My name is Timea Gál Jäger, and as someone who loves uncovering new opportunities for entrepreneurs, I'm looking forward to exploring with Urs today how founders can both do good and do business. So let's dive right in and welcome Urs on the podcast. Hi Urs, how are you doing today?
Hello, very good. Nice to meet you, Timea.
Nice to meet you too. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, happily. Thank you. So my name is Urs Riggenbach. I'm the head of operations at Lytefire, but my journey into impact really started a long time ago. I grew up on a Swiss farm, really close to nature, an organic farm. And when I was young, I had this opportunity then to start traveling, and I was able to go to one of the United World Colleges in India. And spending 2 years in India, I really got to also see, how farmers are living there and compare that to my experience in Switzerland. And I got to understand energy poverty, the cost and the burden that energy represents in, the other 2/3 of the world, broadly put. And that really started to make me passionate about impact and about tackling some of these problems. And when I then started to look more and more into the energy transition that everybody talked about, I saw that it was really focused on electricity production, and we weren't really tackling also the centralization issue of these large power plants. And for me, renewable energy always had this promise of decentralizing energy access, empowering people to have their own energy access, be more independent. And that's what led me to Lytefire. I discovered their work, I think, back in 2012 when the company was founded, and then started to join more actively in 2014, working with the team. And we took this approach to looking at energy not only from an electricity point of view, but also from a thermal point of view. So we saw that there's a lot of fire, a lot of fires are being burned every day in this world. A big part of it powered by fossil fuels, but also a large part of it powered by firewood and charcoal. And so we said, why can't we access solar energy and use the heat to replace those fires? And that's why we call it Lytefire. The company name is Lytefire because basically we take the light, but we create something similar to it, like fire. And so we developed solar ovens, solar roasters, and solar cookers as a way to help entrepreneurs, communities, and farmers and organizations to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels, but also reduce their dependence on firewood and charcoal as such, and replace that with direct solar energy.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Urs. It's really inspiring. It's nice to see how your mission already started in childhood, and then you carried that onto entrepreneurship, and now you are changing the world as you go. Now, let's talk about your collaborations with NGOs and INGOs. I would be very curious to find out, did you see from the get-go that you should be working with them, or did their profile as an ideal buyer emerge later on?
No, they were always, our ideal buyer, because the NGOs are, they exist and they work, directly in basically the market for vulnerable populations. So populations that don't have the means and that are heavily exposed also to the effects of climate change, to all the, poverty that essentially is dependence. And these organizations are working in this field to help remove these dependencies and these burdens from those people. And so for us, they were always, a first market and a key partner in scaling and spreading Lytefire, because they are directly engaging with all those beneficiaries in those contexts. For example, in refugee camps, in rural areas, in peri-urban areas, in slums. These organizations work in the most complicated of environments, where the technology can have a disproportionate impact. It can really change somebody's life, to have a job, to create a sustainable income with, for example, a solar bakery. So they were really our first client to get the technology to where it can have the biggest difference, because this also was the motivation of the team to really have a real impact.
Help us understand a little bit. How are they different compared to an ideal buyer that's a business?
Yeah, the NGOs are very different, but what we share in common and where we align, I think, very much is that impact angle. That approach to, okay, in the end we have to achieve a good result. So that's where we really align, I think, with the NGO. Then yes, they are slower. They have their own internal processes, that make them different from, let's say, a business. There's also the funding source that is different for them, as they rely on donations and internal, fundraising processes. So there's a lot of internal processes that go on when you work with the NGOs, that make it harder for small businesses, especially, to work with them. But on the impact side, and on the upside, they are directly working with the most vulnerable people on the planet.
Okay, so to recap, they are more impact driven, they have more internal processes, so they will move slower. And of course, funding is not as readily available as it would be perhaps with a business. Would that be a good summary?
Yes. But maybe another difference is also that, these NGOs are also very innovative, right? Because they are so driven to support their beneficiaries, the vulnerable populations. They're also very interested in new solutions. So that's actually, a positive, that when you have an innovative product like ours with Lytefire, we're able to, go and share and connect about their mission and how we can help them succeed in their mission. And that's another plus that we have with the NGOs. And for example, Pan International has been very interesting partner and client of ours, because we discussed with them, how we can, help with our technology. And then they said, hey, a technology is good, but when we do an intervention in the field, we always require education surrounding anything we do. We want to build capacity, because we need to root the knowledge locally of how to use this, of how to make the most out of it. And that's actually how we started then to explore the educational side of things, which is a major part of what we do today.
Okay, so they are open to working with businesses that provide something innovative, and it sounds like they also appreciate if you can give them more than a product and provide them with an overarching solution, so to say. Now, let's move forward. So far, we have compared NGOs to businesses. Let's now compare NGOs to NGOs. And since you have worked with several of them, I would like to ask you, did you find any commonalities between them?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about the process. I think, you can always find your entry with an organization, but they're sometimes really broad and connected and multiple organizations working together to get a certain project done. So, for example, you may have, a Swiss NGO that's more on the fundraising side, who is financing an Ugandan local organizations, who then has their own local partners to implement projects. So it becomes quite, complicated. But no matter where you enter, there are two things that need to eventually happen in the sales process. Is, of course, every entity that you interact with need to see the value of what you're proposing. And at some point also, what's good is if the NGOs are really sending this information, for example, a picture, a video, or a brochure of what you're proposing into the field, and ask the local people, hey, do you want this? Do you see the value of this? And then they say, yeah, of course, I see the value of this. For example, I just had a meeting about a project in Zambia the other day, and there are bakeries closing there, because of the fuel cost increase that is happening. So, and we have heard similar things from West Africa too, where just the increases in fuel, which can be due to the just the price fluctuation of fossil fuels, but more and more we're also seeing increases in charcoal prices and firewood prices just because the countries are so much deforested, and the wood needs to be brought from farther and farther away. And now we're seeing these price increases, which puts a lot of pressures on local businesses, especially bakeries, who have a lot of thermal energy they need to bake their bread. And so we hear these things, and that is something that you wouldn't necessarily see from here in Finland. What is the reality on the ground? And so it's always good when the proposal and the idea is sent through the NGO channel to the local people for them to really see the opportunity and discuss it and then get back. And once there is a demand, locally, and people have really vetted your idea and the project idea, then it goes back up, and different parts of the organization will have their say. Eventually, they need to also make a decision about the funding, and they need to check their calendars to see about the implementation. But I think one of the crucial steps is, make sure that your idea actually, or that the NGO partner actually checks your idea with the people on the ground.
Okay, so if you are located in Finland, how can you accurately find out what's the situation in another country, and also what's the feedback to your solution? Would you recommend to companies to have staff on the ground and also prepare for translating their materials into the local language?
Yes, I think there's definitely, you need to have experience. You may not have to have staff everywhere. Like, for example, we have staff in Kenya, and then we have people in Uganda, in Burkina Faso, and others that that can be involved depending on the project load that we have. So we don't have to keep a staff everywhere. But when projects come in, we can hire the local partners, the local consultants that we are very familiar with and we have a good working relationship with, and then execute the work like that, so that we also have a presence. You see, and then we have some people that are that we can send internationally, that we can send to any country, who are then also able to bring their international background of having worked in many African countries.
So now let's talk about how you worked with local NGOs. What's the most common way of doing good and doing business? Does this end up being more often a sale than a tendering process?
Yes, I think the process is really similar when you compare from NGO to INGO. When you have a normal, a regular or small local NGO, then of course you have smaller decision chains, so things can happen a bit faster. And it's a sale. The INGOs, they are intermediaries. They are not necessarily themselves, all of them implementing projects locally. Oftentimes, they also have local partners. So it just kind of adds, a level of complexity as you may be speaking to Plan International Finland, and then they need to speak to Plan International Uganda, and then they need to check in with their regional local staff that's really on the ground, you see.
So now I'm curious, was it so that first you worked with NGOs and then this was a straight path that led you later on to work with INGOs like World Vision and Plan International, or how did this go?
We actually started to work quite early directly with an INGO, that's World Vision. And it was this combined with a sponsorship from Wärtsilä, and later on also supported with Autodesk Foundation, that we had been able to do the first piloting around the technology. So this was at a time when, we had a technology, but we haven't proved the impact it can have in these high impact contexts with these vulnerable populations. And the NGOs have, they're established in places where, refugee camps and places where there's a high level of poverty. And so we worked with World Vision to be able to pilot the technology in a sunny country and with vulnerable populations. And that's, something that we did with World Vision. And then we used that to then start to make sales to other NGOs. But it also led to then more sales to INGOs like Plan International.
Would you like to share how did you end up working with World Vision? What were the first steps to initiate this collaboration?
Yes, well, World Vision has a presence. World Vision Finland has a presence here in Finland, where we're also based. And I think networking is of course a key thing to do as any business, and we got to discuss with them. And they had a program called We Economy. So it's an example of a very innovative program that NGOs can be known for, where they wanted to bring private sector, and they actually wanted to offer the service of introducing private sector innovations that could be beneficial to their beneficiaries. And so they had this We Economy program, and we were participating to that as a way to be able to pilot our technology.
Earlier, you mentioned Wärtsilä, and I have seen them appear in various projects on your webpage. Would you like to open up more about how did you end up working with Wärtsilä and what kind of impact did it have on your business? I think for the Finnish listeners today, this would be an interesting additional information.
Yes. So it was during the piloting phase that we worked with Wärtsilä, and we were able to get a sponsorship from them, and they were able to support our piloting effort. So Wärtsilä, is a big company, and they're also sensitive about sustainability. And so our pitch to them was, hey, here's a new innovation from Finland that could have a big impact in for example, in Kenya, where World Vision is working. And then we proposed to them, why wouldn't they sponsor the work to actually pilot that with World Vision in this context? And they were agreeing to that, and we're happy to support that. And then we were able to pilot and also produce videos and content for them, so that they could also share the good involvement they have in making this new innovation something that is now actually piloted and starts to have a track record.
Okay, so in other words, you reach out to both parties, you pitch your idea and ask them to work together. And if they are open to this synergy, then you can make your impact on the ground, right?
Yes, absolutely. You have to do pretty much everything to get things done.
And let's talk a little bit about your tender with Plan International. So you won a tender with Plan International in 2022. What do you think was crucial to securing this win? And what advice would you give to other companies who would like to follow in your footsteps?
Absolutely. Yes, this was for a project in Sudan, in a refugee camp. And of course, when you look at the world solar map, Sudan has a very good solar radiation. It is also, there are very few trees in the country. So very quickly, Lytefire is an excellent choice because you remove that constant limiting factor of energy cost that any other solution, has. And so normally you approach the NGO, sometimes they come to you and they start to engage about, hey, we're interested in your product. More often than not, you're approaching them. Eva Wissens, our founder, she has been, instrumental in developing the whole approach to NGOs and also the educational offering, and has also started to open this idea of webinars with the INGOs, who have a lot of, different local country offices, to present our solution, and then the local country offices can take the conversation further with us. It's very much helpful in the process of pushing and validating interest for an idea at the local level, because let's say the Nordic or the more international side of the humanitarian organizations, they're always interested in, is there local interest for that? And doing these webinars has been also a good way to generate interest for our solution. But then the sales process continues, and it is really then up to the NGO or the INGO or the UN agency for that matter to assess their own internal processes they have. And with some projects, they may be able to tap into funding that they already have for a very specific mandate where this already fits, or maybe they have to require a tendering process. Especially if it's above a certain amount of money. There are requirements for these tendering processes. So that's really something that once there's interest confirmed on their side, they will basically inform you, hey, we can move this forward maybe as a pilot project, or hey, this needs to go into a tendering process. So just check the tenders the next months and apply, and you will be competing with other companies, to deliver the solution to us.
So you kind of get the heads up from interested parties of what is the best way to work with them. And in some cases, this is with the funding. In some cases, it's a tender, right?
Yes, exactly.
And for you arriving to this stage where they give you the heads up of what's the best way to work together and make an impact on the ground, you need to make yourself known to them. And that is through pitching to them, networking with them, or holding webinars, as you mentioned.
Absolutely, yes.
Anything else that would come to your mind?
When you have like an innovative product, something not generic that you just compete on the mass market, but something innovative, something new, then you absolutely have to reach out. You have to promote your ideas. You need to network. You need to go to conferences, and this is also why we're really grateful for the work that Business Turku has been doing, and not just with this podcast, but also with the different conferences and different delegations they have been organizing. So, for example, I've been able to go to Geneva and attend ADEX there, which is a big conference bringing together all the UN organizations, all the INGOs. So those are great places for innovative companies to go to, get a foot in the door and to present their products. Because for things that are new and innovative, they also need to be in a market creation attitude, right? These entrepreneurs. And, something to be said also about how specific these tenders get, the specificity of these tenders is, it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes it can work in your favor, and sometimes it can really work against you. For example, we've had a tender that was about solar cooking. So I was like, that looks really great, perfect fit. But then it specified further that it would have to be solar induction cooking, which then by definition involves electricity and rules us out. We applied anyway, but the learning from that is that if you're, so innovation doesn't fit 100% of the requirements that are being asked, probably best don't apply. Because in the end, if you don't tick all the boxes, it's going to be very hard to win in a tender. There's now a big push within the UN organizations to reevaluate how these tenders are written, to open up and to say, hey, we need to cook for 250 people, as opposed to saying, we need to have battery integrated solar cookers, you see. So put the problem first and not the product. New innovative solutions need to meet and present and pitch their ideas to these UN agencies, to the INGOs, and then they will put forward a tender about roughly your technology if they're really convinced about that kind of thing. And then yes, you're still competing with other companies that could provide the same solutions. Sometimes what can happen also is that other companies approach you to buy your product to then sell it into the tender, and that just shows that by pushing, for tenders, to happen, you can also expand the demand for your own products internationally.
Okay, so to highlight the main takeaway from here, your advice to the listeners is that if you don't tick all the boxes, in a tender, then it's perhaps best not to spend the time to apply because likely you won't be selected, right?
Yes, it's really you have to be in a check the box mentality when you do these applications. There are places where you can be really great, but it is really hard to compensate for one box that you're not checking, you see. So if you don't check one box, probably in the very limited amount of time this jury is usually spent on reviewing the proposals, if they see, certain things are not fulfilling all the requirements, they may not even take a look at them.
All right, and let's say that you find a tender where you can apply because you check all the boxes. And let's say this is your first tender you are applying to. Do you remember the time when you did this? Did the guides that they put out satisfy all the questions you had, or did you reach out somewhere to get some help and expertise on how to apply for tenders?
Sometimes they have calls, where you can join and ask questions. When there's a window to ask questions, it's definitely recommended to use that window to ask some questions, because not only obviously can it help you answer your question, but also, it shows, okay, we're interested, and it's a form of networking, and they may have themselves other questions about you that they may be able to answer, and there can be a bit of an exchange, and if they are involved in the reviewing of the application, then of course they may actually remember you and they have a bit of context to what you're submitting. In other cases, it may be that these people are not at all involved in the final decision. So when you submit a tender, you can also assume that whoever is reviewing that has zero context, and that's another challenge.
It's very nice to hear about these calls. They do sound very useful. But now when talking about challenges, I would like to know, what is your overall experience with tenders? Do you find that with all the help available to you, they become easy enough, or would you still find them somewhat demanding?
They are definitely demanding, and there's something to be said about, simplifying that process and also, it's a complicated topic, the tendering process. On one side, they want to reduce corruption and, favorism. On the other side, the application forms become longer and longer and the requirements become higher and higher, which make it harder and harder for small and innovative companies to participate in them. So that's a difficult situation to improve.
Yeah, it is a balancing act for sure. This was great. Urs, so many insights, so many great advice coming from you. And now, if there is 3 things you want Finnish SMEs to remember from this podcast, what would those be? So let's wrap up with that.
Absolutely. I think the first one is, you got to build demand for your product, especially if it's an innovative solution that isn't well known. Get out there, participate at the conferences, meet the INGOs, meet the UN agencies, and network, so that you can really start to create some interest and some coverage about your product. I think that's the first point, and not really no way around that, especially for small companies. Then when it comes to the tendering process, eventually, make sure that you really fit all the criteria. If there's a box you're not ticking, that's, my advice is basically don't apply if you don't tick all the boxes. And then maybe something more specific to Lytefire, we're an energy company. We produce an energy solution, but we have found that looking around your product, and also, for example, understanding that NGOs are very interested in education and that they really need, not just to have technological interventions, but, also have capacity building, and they have a big demand to root the knowledge locally about your technology, that you can also explore other options and offerings around your technology. That in our case, for example, with the education work that we've been doing, for example, we've been doing a lot of empowerment of entrepreneurs and teaching them not only how to, technically maintain and use the Lytefire, but also the hands-on, baking skills and the entrepreneurship skills. So that's, what we did is take the technology we have, but when you talk with NGOs, wrap that into an educational offering that does not only deliver a technology, but delivers impact.
So networking, channeling your energy into the right tender, and thinking outside the box to find new ways of doing good and doing business. That's a great summary. Thank you so much, Urs, for spending your time with us today and sharing your knowledge. I'm sure you have given a lot of food for thought for the listeners.
Yes, thank you, Timea. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and bon courage to all the entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much. So there you have it, our 3rd episode of the Do Good, Do Business podcast. If this got you thinking about expanding your business towards working with INGOs, be sure to listen to the previous 2 episodes, as well as check out the video description where you'll find the contact details of Business Tampere from Finland, Technopol from Estonia, RISE from Sweden, and the IT Cluster from Latvia. Reach out to them. Their experts are ready to help you if you are looking to secure deals with international organizations. Thank you once more to Business Turku and the Central Baltic Program for making this podcast possible. My name is Timea Gál Jäger, and it was a pleasure having you listen in today. See you around. Bye-bye.